Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hosting this important hearing, and thank you to the witnesses, the survivors, the many folks who are gathered here today, and particularly the young folks, the activists with Moms Demand Action, so many people that have been highlighting this issue. We appreciate your activism and your service. I also want to make sure I recognize a constituent of mine back home, the founder of Moms Demand Action, Shannon Watts, who happens to live in Boulder, Colorado, where I represent and hail from, and who has led on this issue for so many years. And I'm proud to represent her and so many others in Colorado that have been touched by this issue. I, as I mentioned, have the great honor of representing the state of Colorado, and we have had multiple, countless tragedies of gun violence in our state. Some folks earlier mentioned Columbine High School in 1999, which killed 15, to the shooting in a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado in 2012, in which 12 people perished, along with countless others every day incidents of gun violence. At the time of the shooting at Columbine, I was 14 years old. I lived 10 minutes away and 10 miles away from that high school. But it is not my story that I want to share today. There are many survivors who have waited quite some time to have their experiences heard and acknowledged and true recognition given to this issue. And so I want to share one of their stories before I jump into my questions. A young man, Daniel Mauser, was killed in the Columbine shooting. He was roughly my age, 15 years old at the time. This April 20th, in just 2 months, will mark the 20th anniversary of the tragedy at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado. I spoke to Daniel's father yesterday, Tom Mauser, and he recounted the story to me, that just 2 weeks before the tragedy, 15-year-old Daniel asked his father a question at the dinner table, reflecting on a conversation in his debate class. He said, "Dad, did you know there are loopholes in the Brady Bill?" 2 weeks later, Daniel was killed at Columbine High School with a gun purchased through one of those loopholes. Daniel's father, Tom, remains haunted by that question today and by the hole in our gun laws that allowed his son to be killed. He has committed his life to championing this issue ever since his son's death. And when Tom first began sharing his story, he wore his son's shoes to speak with people, telling people that he had taken his son's place in the great debate about gun violence. Months after the Columbine tragedy, Colorado voters overwhelmingly voted to close the background check loophole, and many other states have since followed suit. The American people understand that we need to keep firearms out of the wrong hands, and yet it is 20 years later, and we at the federal level have shamefully done nothing about this issue. That is why I'm so excited to support H.R. 8 and so grateful to the sponsors, to Representative Thompson, the folks in the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force for leading on this issue. With that, I want to ask a question around extreme risk protection orders and red flag orders. I know it's been discussed at some length by the committee. As some folks may know, my home state of Colorado will soon take up similar legislation, and I support that legislation. I'm hoping we can work on that issue in this committee. But my question is for Major Tapp Harper. As a state that has enacted similar legislation, if you could just speak to some of the impacts that the legislation has had in your state.
Right. So this past year, Maryland just got the extreme risk protective order, and the importance of getting that, it now gives law enforcement officers and other individuals the option of getting protective orders, where in the past it was limited to certain family members and individuals who were married to a person. Otherwise, it would have to be a peace order. So that was very important. And the other thing is, if law enforcement officers see certain behaviors distributed, they can then go and get a protective order for that individual, and they can get the weapons from the home. So that's really important for us.
Thank you, Major Tapp Harper. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield the rest of my time, with your approval, to my colleague, Ms. Macbeth, because I believe her story is certainly one that we need to hear and want to make sure she has ample time to do so.